All right, good afternoon, everyone. This is our weekly press conference that we've been having, and I am very excited to have with us, we've got Mayor Lee, we have Vice Mayor Cobb, we have Chief Sam Roman, and City Manager Bob Cowell. So we're gonna let them do some comments, and just like we normally do, you're gonna be able to type your questions in the chat, and we'll be able to get to them after everybody kind of goes through what they wanna talk to you about. So Mayor Lee, it's all yours.
Actually, I'm going to start this.
Oh, you're going to start?
Yep.
Never mind. Bob, it's all yours.
So good afternoon. As you can tell, we're doing this a little bit different. So I'm going to give a fairly quick, succinct update on COVID, which is why we do these each week, and the city's response. But in light of all of the other things that are going on in the community, we wanted to pivot a little bit today and actually have the mayor, vice mayor, and chief share with you all some additional thoughts relative to those events. And then at the end, we'll come back with obviously the time for questions. So because there are four of us and we're trying to cover a wide range of things, our remarks are a little bit longer than they might otherwise be. So ask that you bear with us until we get into questions. So I'm going to give again, the COVID update. Let me provide you with a little bit of information. Most of you probably already know, but want to make sure that you know that the total number of tests that have been performed for the Roanoke Health District have been corrected to reflect the correct number finally. They have known about this error, which was due to the recording of zip codes for quite some time, but they just now have updated that information. And so where we were before, kind of last in the state, we're now about 15th in the state, and well over 8,400 tests have been performed in our district. There is actually, beginning today, enhanced targeted testing underway by the local health district, and their focus is on highest at-risk populations. Some good news that we have received our $8.65 million in CARES Act funding. One challenge with that, of course, is the congressional approval came with some pretty stringent guidelines attached to it, so we have to get very creative in how it is that we can use that to be able to support the recovery of the community. And to that end, on Monday, the Roanoke City Council approved the creation of the Star City Strong Recovery Task Force. That task force will actually be chaired by Mayor Lee and by Vice Mayor Cobb, and composed of a diverse group of stakeholders from our community. And those citizens that are interested in serving on the task force can go online and actually fill out an application form. So if you go to the city's website and you look where it indicates the council page, there's a section that talks about council appointed bodies on the left side, and there's an application form there that folks can do. And applications will be accepted through June 11th, and that's a fairly short window, but that's because the council is going to make their appointments on June 15th. And if anyone has any questions about that, they can also contact the clerk's office by phone. And of course, the governor issued Executive Order 65 yesterday, which is the beginning of phase 2 this Friday, which includes a number of things in our communities. And so we'll all be adapting to what those new opportunities might be as well. And of course, related to that, on Monday, we actually begin the first step in the reopening of our municipal facilities with the opening of the Treasurer's Office and the Commissioner of Revenue's office for transactions other than DMV. The DMV transactions will come a bit later. So that is my abbreviated update regarding COVID, but actually, surprisingly, when we started planning for this, we didn't think there was going to be much to cover, and actually between $8.65 million and phase 2 of the governor's plan, there's actually quite a bit in there. So, hopefully we'll be able to answer any questions you all might have on that as we progress forward. But at this time, we're going to, as I said, pivot this conversation now to the events that have been going on across our nation and in our community, and going to ask Mayor Lee to get us kicked off with that.
Well, thank you very much. Let me say good afternoon to everybody. A great deal has occurred over the last several days, both positive and troubling. It is critical we not lose sight of what this is about and who we are as a community. Most significantly, we must not forget that the outrage being displayed in our community and all across this nation is due to the heinous acts of individuals that disgrace the meaning of law enforcement everywhere. that is to protect and serve. These acts denied Mr. Floyd the dignity all humans deserve, no matter their conduct or the color of their skin. Let me say, the brutality that we observed in Minneapolis is unacceptable and never will be a part of what is acceptable in policing here in Roanoke, Virginia. As horrific as the actions in Minneapolis were, we all know it was only the latest in a long line of brutal actions against African Americans, a line that leads back 400 years to a port right here in Virginia. This brutality is a symptom of the much larger evil systematic racism. We must not forget that even as we rightfully object to what happened to Mr. Floyd, anti-racism is the objective. Likewise, we must remember who we are as a city and what we as a community have and are continuing to do to confront the issues of racism. We're a city with diverse leadership who are in positions of power and influence that allow us to ensure our actions benefit, not harm, our community. I will return to this later in our remarks, and at this time, I'd like to turn this over to Chief Romans to talk further about the most recent events. And thank you, Chief, I was with you the entire weekend, and thank you for your service to the city, and we look forward to working with you.
Thank you, Mayor. Obviously, I concur, the department concurs with everything that the mayor has just elaborated on. And I just wanted to personally and further state that in no way does law enforcement endorse what has happened in Minneapolis. We emphatically believe, both my personal and professional opinion, that the actions that we saw taken by the officers and the inaction taken by some officers is not appropriate to professional law enforcement and indeed criminal. So we have done things here at the Roanoke Police Department to ensure that something of this nature does not happen here. And there's several forums in which we try to make sure that we are doing everything that we can to ensure that this does not happen in the very professional organization of the Roanoke City Police. And that includes through streams of training, our promotion, our hiring, and many other avenues in which we try to take, most of which, all I've mentioned, is partnering with our community. This is one of the greatest things I think that Roanoke City Police does. It's something that we have done. It's something that we are doing, and it's something that we will continue to do. This partnering with our community, we definitely want that to be a part of our culture. It's not an assignment that an officer has. It is truly a part of the culture. And it's my job and the leader of the Roanoke City Police Department. That's what I and other leadership members of my team endeavor to do. Ensure that community partnership is at the forefront of everything we do. Now, with saying that, obviously, no organization is perfect, and ours is included in that. And we are looking for those imperfections and doing everything we possibly can to not only avoid them, but when issues come up, we deal with them appropriately. So again, we are for our community. We believe that we are part of our community. That has been the case in the past, and it will be the case in the future. Thank you.
Thank you, Chief. And Vice Mayor, your comments, please. Joe, you're on mute.
I thought I sounded pretty interesting there for a while. Thank you all. Thank you, Mayor and Chief and Bob, for your comments. I think we all agree that what we have seen over these over this last few weeks and here in Roanoke have laid bare how far we as a nation have to go in addressing brutality and racism in all of its forms. Those who gathered and conducted themselves peacefully this past weekend showed there are reasons for hope. African American elders who fought racism in the 1960s in our community stood alongside their children and grandchildren to once again say, enough. Sadly, this hope also represents our challenge, generation after generation continues to fight the same fight and battle the same evils, and we're exhausted. Our African American brothers and sisters are exhausted. Our brown brothers and sisters, people of color in our communities, are exhausted. As the mayor and our fellow council members indicated this Monday, we all agree that this must stop. We can't necessarily end racism across the country, but we can and must do our part to end racism here in Roanoke. This is why we have had conversations, ongoing conversations with the elders in our community about how to right the wrongs associated with urban renewal and the scars that have remained since that time. It's why we formed a task force to reduce gun violence and approved funding to implement its recommended actions. It's why we will continue to meet as a community time and time again to hear the stories of pain and hurt and anguish, not only of racism, but how we can work together to end racism in our community. It's why our city council has consistently worked to ensure appointments of African Americans to various boards, commissions, and agencies within our city. The people who make decisions regarding, for example, who will lead our schools. We want our city government and our city commissions and boards and agencies to reflect the diversity, the very rich and beautiful diversity of our city. We are a city of action, and we're a city of compassion. A man's unjust and unnecessary death brought us here, as did the unjust and unnecessary deaths of those who came before George Floyd. He deserved the dignity he was denied. At the council meeting on Monday, Council Member Trish White Boyd suggested, and the rest of us concurred, that we must acknowledge Mr. Floyd and his family and the pain they are experiencing. We will do this officially as a council through a resolution, and personally as fellow hurting human beings, with a personal note of sympathy to Mr. Floyd's family. We will be following this compassion with continued actions. We will continue to meet, to listen, and to learn from one another about how racism is affecting our community and what we as a city can do to address it, change it, and transform it to truly make our city healthy and whole. I now want to turn it back over to Mayor Lee, who will continue with any final remarks.
Thank you, Vice Mayor. And as mayor, I will continue the conversations I have had for years. And as recently as last night, with those impacted by racism and seeking a better tomorrow. I will continue my efforts at strengthening the relationship we and our police have with our churches, our neighborhoods, our youth, and others through initiatives like the Lee Youth Outdoor Basketball League that we've been bringing together now for over 5 years, neighborhood gatherings, which we all participate in as a council, and a national night out and so many other initiatives that we have that's going well in our city. We as a city will continue to make investments in our neighborhoods, as we have with the Community Solutions Center, the Melrose Library, the Gainsborough Library, and the Melrose Orange Target Area Initiatives. We will continue to find ways to ensure our youth have access to quality education, can get a meaningful and rewarding job, can start and sustain a small business, and have real opportunity to join in the economic success so many others have access to in our community. I will continue to work alongside our new police chief, our city manager, and our city council to ensure that we have a police department that serves and protects you, and that you live in a city that helps you succeed no matter where you live or the color of your skin. And that's something that we all point to. Thank you.
Thank you all. And this now turns to the point where we entertain questions. And one of those has already been typed in. And this is directed to Mayor Lee and Chief Roman. And it references, the mayor made reference to this in his remarks. It references to a community conversation that both of them participated with others with Pastor Scott and again, some other local leaders. The question is, why was that important for you, the chief, and you, the mayor, to be a part of, and how do you think that discussion went?
Well, I will say that it's an invitation I got from a church, African American church in the Melrose community, and I thought it was well done, and I wanted to be there because I think we need to continue our conversations, not only in rallies or what have you, but in meetings. And I thought it was, I like the initiative that Pastor Cecil Scott took to bring leaders together to talk about that. And I feel that the chief was a part of that. And I thought some barriers were broken. And I felt that it went very well. And I was pleased at what went on. And I'll let the chief respond to that.
Sure. I obviously thought it was a great opportunity for me as the official police chief to come and, number one, hear, and number two, acknowledge the concerns that were brought out in the forum last night. And that's from a professional perspective. And from a personal perspective, I was able to ensure that everyone present understood that I agree and understand the frustrations and join each of the members there and their fight for advocacy and social justice. So I thought it was most important to come together in that environment because, as I mentioned last night, one of the important things is that each of us on that stage has influence and a certain level of power. And when we can culminate that influence and that power in a like-minded vision, and we all press toward the mark of a goal, anything can happen, anything can be accomplished. So I too thank Pastor Scott for providing that opportunity for the community to come together, and we'll continue to do what we've always done, which is definitely show up, be there, listen, and acknowledge our community when our community speaks to us.
And for those of you that have not yet seen the video, we will be, after this conference, be providing off of our different social media accounts a link so that you're able to actually access and see that. That video, I think, is about an hour and 20 minutes long or so. So certainly would encourage you. There were, I think, maybe 5 different folks in addition to the mayor, the police chief on there, including Jordan Bell, who helped organize the rally that occurred on Saturday. So I think it was definitely worthwhile and something that ought to be certainly have the opportunity to look at it as well. Ralph with the Roanoke Times is talking. Obviously, you all know that the vast majority of folks that participated in the event over at the first event in the weekend were of course conducting themselves obviously in a very peaceful manner, and the event itself went very well as well. But Ralph is asking the question about what if any specific action occurred that prompted the use of the pepper spray. And you recall that Chief Roman has referenced in previous interviews the use of personal pepper spray as well as some pepper balls by the officers. So what prompted that action during the demonstration on Saturday is the question that Ralph has asked. So Chief, if you...
Sure. As we're aware, obviously, after the event at Washington Park, the police department was not aware that a march would occur after that. When we became aware of that, actually doing the speeches that were being given at Washington Park, that's when it was known that a march was to take place. So it is incumbent upon the police department to then try to ensure that safe passage can be done to include traffic, which obviously is the movement of a lot of moving pieces at the time. And the other side of that is, as a police department, there are intelligence streams, bits of information coming from both classified sources and sources in open source media, such as social media, and which at that time were being monitored. And there were a lot of indications that, again, I agree, 99% of the fine folks who were marching toward downtown, there was a small element in that crowd that gave indications that there was going to be serious property damage and violence that was to occur, not only at the police department, but at the jail, as well in the downtown businesses. So at that time, it became incumbent upon the police department to try to limit access to those areas that had been identified. And that's what happened. There was actually 3 places in which officers were placed to try to limit access to the points of target, if you would, by, again, a very small portion of the march and the protesters. We tried to limit that places in 3 places, 2 of which the marchers and protesters passed that. And obviously the 3rd was our last point in which we could try to redirect traffic to both accommodate safety factors and also accommodate the will of the protesters, the good protesters. So it was at that point where that 3rd point in which the crowd was still trying to get beyond that 3rd place. And unfortunately, we were not able to allow that. And we had to take measures to ensure that no one, even the ones who at some point were trying to pass that point, we just could not allow that to happen.
Thank you, Chief. Gene Morano has asked a question. Chief had mentioned in some of his remarks earlier some of the steps that are used at the city of Roanoke regarding the way in which we ensure we're getting the police force that we want and need for our community. And this relates to Gene's question, which is, do police departments need to do more personality vetting for new hires? And so, Chief, I know obviously it's a really extensive process to go through in securing folks that actually will recruit. And so if you wouldn't mind taking a shot at providing kind of what we do and maybe other areas that
absolutely. That is definitely one of the things that we try to do through psychological evaluations to ensure that the right candidate is being selected to become a police officer. As you know, a police officer has a very difficult job in which he or she must be able to relate to anyone they interact with. And so we definitely try to ensure that the right personality is selected to be successful as a police officer. I think that we can take that a step further. I do believe that emotional intelligence, for those of you who are familiar with that topic, should be a part of the selection process, where we evaluate how well a candidate can relate to others and be empathetic and even apathetic in certain situations. And so that is a step that I advocate for, and it will be a step that we actually try to move toward as we explore this topic and see how it fits within the culture of hiring police officers. Other things we do is we would definitely like to move to, in a more broad sense, is involve our community in the hiring of police officers throughout agencies across Virginia and beyond. I think there's currently limited opportunities for our citizens to be a part of that process. For instance, one component of the hiring process is an oral interview panel where officers or prospective officers sit in front of a panel of police professionals. I don't see any reason why our community is not invited to participate in that area and have input on some of the candidates that's being hired as a police officer. So that is another thing that I would like to see occur in the Roanoke Police Department. And as many of you know, I believe this is day 60 something for me. So these are some of the things that as leader of that organization, as my tenure builds, these are some of the things that I would definitely like to change. So great question. Thanks for asking.
Thank you. Next question deals with the fact that things have calmed, obviously, over the last few nights here locally, at least, and whether there's anything specifically that Chief Roman you would attribute to that sense of calm.
Yes, definitely. Things have definitely been calm. I think the number one reason for that is because our citizens here in Roanoke City, they are not violent protesters. They want to just advocate their message, which in most cases the police department agrees with that message. I think in the emotionalism of the very unfortunate and illegal activity that occurred in Minnesota, there was a lot of emotionalism that revolved around that, and I understand that. I think we have a great police department who was able to minimize damage to our businesses and minimize any violence or clashes, if you would, between groups and between the police department. We've worked very hard to ensure that we are part of the de-escalation factor when it comes to police lines and giving people the proper room and the proper area to protest.
And Ralph, your question regarding that third place that I believe, and you correct me if I'm wrong, Chief, but I believe the Chief was referencing to 3 different points on the street on Campbell at which the police requested that the folks that were marching to actually stop. And it was that third point in that place on Campbell Street that was referring to, not a third location.
Sorry, I was a bit confusing on that, but yes, our goal was to perhaps stop the crowd. And since we didn't have the benefit of sharing any information that possibly would have come in before the march because we wasn't aware of the march, our goal was to perhaps stop and maybe identify the leaders or the organizers and just share some of the concerns that we were getting in through social media and other sources of intelligence, and perhaps see if there was a way where we can come to an amicable agreement in terms of the route that the march would take, and we would have done anything that we possibly could to accommodate the desired route, as well as maintain safety from the very few people within the group that we assessed as to be dangerous.
Thank you. Are there any other questions? I guess I'll offer up as well to Vice Mayor Cobb or Mayor Lee, any other points that you would want to stress on any of the items that you raised in your remarks or in response to any of the questions that have been raised.
I'll let the Vice Mayor go first on that.
I will just say that I appreciate the additional information shared. I did not realize until today that the rally was originally scheduled to just be held at Washington Park. And what was advertised was that people would be invited to go down to the street and hold up their signs. So hearing that the march kind of developed as it went, I think is important for people to hear. and that responses were taken to both be amenable to that and supportive of that, but also be very cautionary. And I think that's important information for citizens to have. And I appreciate what the chief said, that, you know, Roanoke is a city that is all about transformation and doing that nonviolently. And I think 99% of what we have seen supports that. So I appreciated that clarification, and I think it's important for our community to have that information. And so I want to thank the chief for filling in some of those gaps for us.
Thank you, Vice Mayor. The next question actually is a COVID related question, and it is to the mayor, and then I'll pick up after the mayor on this one as well. It indicates that the mayor had expressed reservations previously about entering phase 2 due to the rising cases of COVID-19 in our community. And the question is, do you think that we should be moving into that phase this Friday, as the governor has, of course, authorized under the most recent executive order?
Well, I have some concerns. I haven't actually decided yet in terms of which way we should go. I want to talk more with a city manager, because my concern is that testing is being done, and I see an increase. The numbers seem to be spiking, and I'm not sure we're all together ready to go to another phase right now. So I do have reservations about that. I think we're moving a lot faster than I feel that the numbers indicate. And so I'll be talking with the manager about our thoughts and what we're going to do. I know we've got plans to move forward with it, but I have a concern given where we are in the testing is now becoming more available here in our area. And I just think that that's something that we need to be concerned about.
And what I would add to the mayor's thoughts are, most of, here in our area, most of the increase in our cases have come in the form of outbreaks. And most of those outbreaks until recently were tied to really to skilled nursing kind of facilities. More, some of those have been tied to some other areas in the community, and in particular have been disproportionately affecting our Hispanic community in the area. And that's actually part of what that more focused or targeted kind of testing that's being done with the Department of Health. And so they've kind of pivoted their positions locally to focus a lot of their energy and effort on managing those outbreaks to ensure that those don't grow. So I think the feeling here from our local health department officials have been that as long as we're able to manage those outbreaks and that you don't see a broader spread of cases through the general population, then we're able to actually accommodate moving into those next phases with it. So that's a part of what I think our local health department will continue to monitor as we go forward in it. For us locally within the city, that's part of the reason why on our side, inside city government, we're actually moving at a little bit slower pace in how we reopen our facilities and doing it in a very incremental kind of phased manner so that we can ensure the safety of certainly the general public as they come into our buildings, but also the 1,700 employees that we're responsible for as they return to their places of work as well from their remote locations. Interestingly, as we've had in the council, of course, on Monday, shared some of the notes from these, as we've been having conversations with a lot of local businesses. Some, of course, are very anxious to reopen in some capacity and really need to do so, like our restaurants, for example. Others we've heard from, whether they be in banks or some other office kind of operations, they too are taking a little bit slower process in moving forward in actually reopening, because they too want to ensure the absolute best for their employees and whatever customers they may have. And as long as they're able to generally provide their services from remote locations, that's where they're proceeding. So it's been kind of an interesting process that we've actually moved forward as we go on as well and stuff. So at this point, I know there's a couple of more comments, and I think what we'll do is we'll try to address those offline as well. But I know in the interest of time, as we keep again, I knew our remarks were a little bit longer today as we went through, since we were actually expanding beyond COVID. So in this case, we're going to go ahead and thank everyone for their participation. Certainly, we will follow up with whatever remarks or comments or questions we were not able to get to at this point, and provide you with answers with those. Again, I'll mention that the video that was referenced earlier, we will have a link so that you're able to actually view that as well, which involved also the chief and the mayor talking about some of these very same issues. So thank you very much, and we'll look forward to joining you all again next week as we continue our discussions and updates regarding the city's response to COVID-19. Thank you.
All right, Joe, take care.